Baruch Hashem, I hope everyone had an amazing Purim. I saw some photos. I saw people were coming for Kiryat Megillah. That's amazing. We're gonna after we spoke about Purim, I'd like to focus for the next maybe week or two, or possibly 3. Maybe there'll be a different speaker in between, just to kind of diversify a little bit, but just kind of focus on Pesach. I told Daniel, we spoke about it this week. We could probably get together on a separate time for halachot for Pesach. There's a lot involved. It's a little more technical, but just so you want to be a little bit knowledgeable, maybe we'll set some time for that. But kind of Pesach itself, it's a long holiday. We celebrate it, in Israel 7 days. Here it's 8 days, and it's a very good time for the Jewish people. Pesach. It really is a good time for us, and I want to kind of discuss how we got to this reality that it's a good time for us. So, does anyone know how the Torah calls Pesach? What's the name for it in the Torah? Anybody know? It's Chag HaMatzot. Chag HaMatzot it's called the holiday of the matzot. Now, matzot are, some people love them, some people hate them. It's like people have a thing where they can't wait for matzot, or they're really hard to digest. Like, it's very difficult for a lot of people. It's like a cinder block that sits in the stomach, and it gives people a lot of problems. Pesach, and some people they really enjoy it. There's no issue. But what's interesting is, believe it or not, this was the very food that we ate as slaves. Now, I know the impression is the reason we eat matzot is because right before we left Egypt, the dough didn't have enough time to rise, and that was something that took place, and the Torah discusses this. But really, that's really what we ate as slaves. That was the food that we had. Now, what's the reason behind that? It takes a long time to digest when you eat matzah, which was very, I guess, economical at the times for the Egyptians to give us this type of food. It's very coarse, it's very difficult to digest. And so, the Torah calls it, we know it's, what we celebrate on Pesach is the concept of freedom. But interestingly enough, the way we call this holiday is actually Chag HaMatzot. And you would think that something that we eat that's coarse, that's hard bread, you would think the last thing would be a symbol of Pesach would be that. But matzot ends up being the main symbol of Pesach. Not only is it the main symbol of Pesach, but it's the very thing we use to celebrate our freedom. So what we ate as slaves was matzot, which was the very thing that you would think, I no longer want to see that thing anymore because it reminds me of all the slavery and all the experiences that I had. You would think, I don't ever want to see this type of dish and this type of food again. So what does the Torah do? No. But the very thing that you defined yourself, but the very thing that makes us feel like slave is the very thing that we call it by. Not only that, it becomes the main symbol of the whole holiday. We eat it every year. For thousands of years, we've been doing exactly the same thing. There's this sense of opposition of feelings. On the one hand, we're being freed, we're being liberated, and on the other side is we may be liberated, but we're using the very same thing that defined our slavery. What's that all about? Why do we call it Chag HaMatzot? It should be called, it's called Chag HaChirut, yes, according to Chazal, but in the Torah gives it the very same term that you would think you run away from, which is the matzot itself, which reminds us, by the way, when you start the Haggadah, the beginning of the Haggadah is Ha Lahma Anya, which is called, this is the bread of our affliction, our challenges, our difficulties. But it's exactly what the Torah is doing. Why is the Torah doing that? Now, the second thing is, which is very interesting to know, and I want to get some insight into that as well. Why is it that every single year on the calendar date, the same day Pesach falls on, so I think this year falls on a Monday, is exactly the same day that Tisha B'Av falls on. Every single year, the same day Pesach falls on is identical to the day that Tisha B'Av falls on. What's the connection between the two? That's the second question. Now, we have a commandment. This is brought down in Halakha. We read this in Parashat Bo, that when we sit down in the Seder, then what we do is, the pasuk says, "Ulman tesaper be'ozne bincha, uven bincha et asher it'alalti b'mitzrayim, ve'et ototai asher samti bam v'yadatem ki ani Adonai." It's a very strange commandment, and I'll tell you why. What does Hashem want us to do? To give over the story of Pesach, to give over the whole story as it is, not sugarcoat anything, right? But mainly, we do want to focus on the miracle aspect, and we should convey it over to our children, to our grandchildren, and we should know that Hashem is the one who did it. So the first thing, that's the way you read the pasuk, it's rather the opposite. Why? Before I convey any miracles, before I want to give a story, I need to know God. What it's saying over here, first give over the story to your kids, and then you should know God. No, first I need to know God, then I need to know the miracles that I'm giving over, and then that makes a lot more sense, because how can I give over something to the kids if I don't know where it's come from and who comes from and what my experiences are? You would think, first let me know God, then let me give it over to the kids, but it's exactly the opposite, which doesn't really make much sense. In addition, why did Hashem do all these miracles for us? What's that all about, right? Like why is that something that was very critical for us on Pesach itself? Now, my rabbi asked this question. It's a very compelling question. In the 10 Commandments, the first word that God said to us, the first words out of all words that He said to us, was Anochi Hashem Elokecha. The first word is Anochi. Now, one of the things the rabbis give us credit in living in Mitzrayim is we did 3 things, right? Velo shinu et leshonam, malbusham, veshmam. They did not change the way they dressed. They did not change their names they gave each other, right? And they did not change the way they spoke, which means they spoke Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh. That's what they spoke. Which means these 3 things we got credit and praise for when we were in Mitzrayim, right? It's almost as if it's almost like a formula for us not to almost like assimilate, right? Don't change your names, don't change the way you speak, don't change the way you dress, essentially, right? It's almost like a formula that we didn't want to assimilate. Today, we don't have so much of that problem because we have the Torah, and the Torah is one value system that we all connect to. At the same time, we got credit for that. What does God do? Very strange. We come out of Mitzrayim, He gives us the 10 Commandments. The first commandment, the first word of the 10 Commandments is Anochi. Anochi is not a Hebrew word, it's an Egyptian word. Why would God, the first word He would communicate with us would be an Egyptian language, an Egyptian term? Why would He do that? If you praise us for speaking Hebrew, give me Hebrew. But the first word that we heard 2 commandments. The rest came through Moshe. The first word would be Hebrew because we got praise. Nobody. I'm using an Egyptian term to communicate with you. The first term, Anochi, is an Egyptian word.
So we remember what happened?
Let's see. So, just want to quickly recap the questions and then kind of go into it a little bit. So we're first trying to understand again what is the idea of why are we calling it Chag HaMatzot? Why is the very thing that gives us trauma? You would think that the bread of affliction, that the very thing that would give us trauma is the very thing we title. That's the holiday we call it. We eat it. We surround it. Everything we do is around matzot, right? But we give it. That's the name we give it. What's that all about? There's a contradiction of feelings here. We're being liberated, but at the same time we're going to trigger some trauma. How is that any effective? Secondly, is the why does Pesach and Tisha B'Av fall exactly the same day? What's the connection between the two? And also, we're trying to understand the pasuk before is we have a mitzvah to give it to, when we convey over to the children. By the way, if let's say someone's married and no kids, then the wife and husband speak to each other about it. They talk to each other about it. They tell each other the miracles. And by the way, if you're alone, it's halakha, and Maimonides bring this down. Let's say nobody should ever celebrate Pesach alone, but if you're celebrating Pesach alone, you have to ask yourself. You have to tell yourself the miracles, right? So that mitzvah is not limited to just if you're with people. It's an obligation you have to discuss it. So, but before I discuss it and give it, I need to know God. Here, it's asking me to give the miracles before I know God. So you would think it would be the reverse, but it's not. It's in different order. And lastly, why is God speaking to us in the word Anochi? Anochi means it's an Egyptian term. He gave us credit for preserving our language, right? We got a lot of credit for it. Why are you using an Egyptian term to communicate to me in that way? So the first place, after we left Mitzrayim, the first place we went to is called Pi HaHirut. Pi HaHirut is if you take the word Pi HaHirut, it means, if you break it down, it means the freedom of speech. Pi, which comes Pe, means freedom, and or speech, and Hirut means freedom itself. So Pi HaHirut means the mouth of freedom or the freedom of speech. It's the first place we arrived as soon as we left Egypt. And which means that the holiday itself of Pesach is a holiday that is very much connected to freedom of speech. What does that mean? I'm not going to get political, I promise. What does that mean? Right? What is it? What's the freedom of speech concept that's connected to Pesach itself? There's a very incredible Gemara which elaborates on a pasuk in Mishlei. And it's actually one of the first interesting psukim that my mother taught me. I remember when I was younger. She has her moments which she can be very scholarly. So the pasuk, we have a pasuk in Mishlei that says De'aga belev ish yashhena. What does that mean? De'aga belev ish yashhena. So the rabbi, his name is Rabbi Ami, he comes, right? And there's a dispute who said this, Rav Asi or Rav Ami. This is in Masechet Yoma. He says, Yasihena, not Yashhena. What it means is Yasihena mida'ato. And one says, Yasihena le'achirim. Which means, one opinion says, Yasiyah, the word siyah means to communicate, to speak. Yasihena mida'ato, right? Speak it out of your da'at, out of your mind. And the other one says, speak it to other people. Now the word de'aga, what does de'aga mean? De'aga means worry, something that's consuming you, right? It's something that's overwhelming you. It's very difficult. So the Gemara says you have a problem, you have something you want to something you want to overcome. Got to talk about it. Got to talk about it. That's what you got to do. That's what the Gemara comes and says, right? Now, if I would take it a step further, when a person deals with a serious problem, if they unfortunately experience a traumatic episode, God forbid any form of tragedy, right? The way, unfortunately, when a person goes through that experience, a person is very much overwhelmed and they feel enveloped by that experience, which they can't even talk about it. They have a struggle. When a lot of the Jews migrated to America after the Holocaust, almost none of them spoke about it. There's Elie Wiesel, some of you probably have heard of Elie Wiesel. He was an author. He has a book called The Jews of Silence, right? And where a lot of Jews could not talk about the Holocaust. Generally, they didn't have the ability to do it. Later on, they were able to do it, but in the beginning, they weren't able to do it. And so, anytime a person cannot speak about it, it means that the problem is greater than them. They're almost like they become a prisoner of the problem themselves, and they're not able to talk about it. What happens once you do decide to speak about it? Once you do decide, okay, I need to figure out a way how to communicate this, what happens? It's actually quite unbelievable. Once you've articulated the problem to yourself, regardless of how severe the problem is, the problem begins to take shape. It begins to have dimensions, it begins to have borders. Up until now, we tend to really struggle with things that we don't know. Something that is unknown is a fear within us. I don't know, people don't know something like, God forbid, if a person has any sickness and they don't know much about the sickness, it's a very scary reality because there's no way to deal with it. Even if a sickness that people are aware of and they're concerned about, at least if we understand we have some degree of information or knowledge about that sickness, then at least the knowledge of it overcomes a big part of the fear. Because then there's something I can do to manage it, I can approach it, there's actions that I can take, at the very least. There's a book I read, it's a very interesting book, it's in Hebrew, and unfortunately some young person got I don't remember exactly what kind of disease it was, but he went to a rabbi and asked him what to do. So the rabbi, he didn't give him, a typical answer. I'm sure he said pray and all that. He says, you should really learn a lot about this disease. You should go and study it thoroughly. Really go into deep detail. I guess he also saw in him that a tremendous sense of anxiety, which is understandable, because essentially anxiety is something that we have no grasp on. It's something that I have no control over, and therefore and I don't know. And essentially that's what anxiety is. I have no control. And so if I begin to understand something and I give it shape and form, then I can at least have a plan, have an action which I can go and do something with it. Which means the more I talk about it, then I can slowly begin to understand it. And the more I understand it and the more I talk, then the more knowledge I have, then it gives me ability to manage that challenge. Which means, as Jews, we were slaves. And we were slaves for 210 years. It's a very long time. And the idea here is, the reason we go and we talk about this, about Pesach and Haggadah and everything, is because we have to come to a point where we're no longer a victim of the problem, we have to become masters of the problem. The way to become a master of the problem, at the very least, is I need to be able to define the problem and give it shape. It needs to take on some sort of degree of shape. But in reality, what changed? And if I take it a step further, none of us can understand this reality. We really can't. Being a slave is one of the worst things people can experience. As a person, what the African Americans experience in the transatlantic slave trade, they have become prisoners. It is very, very difficult to extricate oneself from these traumas, from what people actually went through. It's a very difficult thing to manage, right? And so the idea here is that when we speak about it, we do two things. Not only do we alleviate the stigma that we have as Jews, but we also overcome the stigma that we have. And as Jews throughout centuries, there's always a stigma or a stereotype that has to do with us. And it's very difficult that if you have a stereotypes attached to you all the time, you're always going to be looked at by society as a specific person, right? And you're always going to be categorized. Till this day, we're very much categorized as people. We control, the nonsense. We control the media and all that stuff, blah, blah, blah. All these things. We have all these things where there are those who are in position of power and everybody acknowledges it. But a lot of it has nothing to do with Judaism per se. And even if there are those who are in power, who says they're connected to Judaism? Who says they have Jewish values? Who say, I have no issue with Mark Zuckerberg, but he didn't marry a Jew. He didn't marry a Jew. He's a very powerful person. He probably knows a lot about everyone here in this room than most people do. The access that he has, realistically speaking. But he has a lot of power. What does him being Jewish have to do with Jewish values and Judaism? What does that do with it? So you have these stigmas, right? But this is where Pesach is unbelievable. Pesach and the Seder, if you go through the Seder and you read the Haggadah, you see all the difficulty and that we had as Jews. And we don't sugarcoat it, and we talk about it, and we say it to each other. And not only that, if I take it a step further, Pesach became a mirror image and a formula on how to deal with all the trials and tribulations that we're going to experience in the future. Which means it's not just, this is what happened, let's talk about it. No. It's a model, it's a formula for what's unfortunately to happen in the future and how we can extricate ourselves and from that experience. It wasn't just limited, that's what we went through, we talked. No, it's much more than that. We're creating this mechanism within ourselves that for us to overcome all these challenges and all these things, and that's on the individual level, but also on the collective level, is for us to go on and talk about it, and we do it every year. Which means, if we do that, if I can talk about a problem, if I can actually go into something that I have a tremendous sense of trauma by it means I've become master of it. I've mastered it. I'm no longer defined by it, and it doesn't faze me. It doesn't mean that I don't have the battles, or it doesn't mean that everyone can have demons that they tend to battle with on a regular basis. right? At the same time, I'm comfortable that I can speak about it because I've mastered that issue, that problem. Which means, this is something that we have to tell our kids. This is something that you have to tell if you have a younger brother, if you have someone in the family, maybe a nephew, someone that even looks up to you. You should share the challenges. We should discuss the difficulties that we had. We shouldn't hide it. Because hiding it means that I'm the victim of it and not the master of it. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of what I've been through. That's something, there's an obligation to go and talk about it. And that's why, before even we acknowledge God, we have to acknowledge what happened to us. We have to say, okay, this is what happened, this is what we experienced. And if I do that, then I become comfortable. And if I can become comfortable with it, then I can become confident with it. And since that level of confidence has also taught me how to become resourceful. Now you learn through the difficulty, okay, what do I do in this case? I'm action-oriented because we always focus on what we cannot do instead of focusing on what we can do. Talking about gives you a chance to focus on what you can do, not what you cannot do, what's within your control and not what's not within your control. Which comes down to an unbelievable thing. Now Pesach is no longer something we're ashamed by, it becomes a source of pride for us. That means everything that we've actually experienced and done has actually become a source of inspiration. So a father goes and talks to his son about his failures. Oftentimes, I think probably in the millennial generation and in the one that goes before, right? Some of you are millennial, maybe some of you are just on the cusp. A lot of times the parents can say, at your age what I did? And they tell you all their successes, right? Which is good. You have something to look up to, but it's a lot more meaningful hearing about someone's failures. I would buy a book that discusses all the failures of all the biggest rabbis, and I want to know what their failure was, because there's so much success out there, which is great, but I want to know more about the failure than I do about the success. Not because I want to fail, it's because I want to understand how they got out of it. I want to understand what the experience was and what was what they said to themselves. That's a lot more interesting. That's a lot more meaningful. That's what the halakha is. That's what we have to do. We have to discuss these difficult things. And it seems, it's like 2,000, 3,000 years ago. No, but it's not. It's a mirror image for everything we've been through. Everything that we've experienced. Anywhere from Purim. Purim, they wanted to kill us again. Boom. I mean, the story goes on. The destructions of the Mikdash. Another one. The Spanish Inquisition. The Russian pogroms. It doesn't end. Right? All the massacres. It's one after the other. It doesn't stop. Remember, a while back I read Mark Twain. And how he says that, the Jew beat him with one hand, with hands tied behind the back. Like the Romans, the Greeks, everyone came. The Persians, they're not relevant anymore. The idea here is it's not that we need to talk about it. We must. It's not a choice. We have to. I'm not saying everybody's ready to talk about something traumatic, but it has to be part of the game plan. That's the whole idea of when we sit around the table and we do this Haggadah. There's an absolute obligation to tell the next generation what we've been through. It's not even, we need to do it because we understand what it's like. We understand the difficulty history has showed it to us. And even on a personal level, someone's grandfather went through something very difficult, or father, or maybe an uncle. It needs to be spread out. Which means the matzah, we were trying to understand, why is it that we're calling Chag HaMatzot? The matzah is not bread of affliction. It's called the halach ma'anya, but it's a bread of pride. It's something that we see it, and it gives us a real sense of fulfillment, right? That's what the whole idea here is. And it is, and unfortunately it's evidence of the tragedy, but it's also evidence of the success. And there's no place for us to hide it. And so when we take that symbol of slavery, and we use it for a source of liberation, I've mastered it. I was able to take it, and I was able to convert it into a source of pride and a source of even success. It's not like you're sitting at a therapist and you need relief. It's not like, when you go to a therapist and you sit down by a therapist and you talk about it and you just let it out. It's not that. It's much more than that. It's a part of my identity. when I said before, and I asked about why did God use the word Anochi? Why use that terminology? What's the logic in using that terminology? Even when there's a lot of people, even when they become religious, they change their identity. And by the way, it's a common misconception a lot of times when people grow spiritually, or even they see others grow spiritually, and they want to do the same, but they choose not to because they're scared they may have to sacrifice their individuality doing so. Nothing is further from the truth. Nothing is further from the truth. You're not supposed to sacrifice your personality, your individuality, and your experience. They're part of who you are. They're part of your makeup, and this is your life. This is what Hashem put you through. That means that you, and this is where it comes unbelievable. My rabbi once said this to me, and I didn't. It hit a little bit later in life, but he said to me, don't think that Torah just gives us something. Don't think that you learn Torah and it gives you something. You also give back to Torah. What do you mean I give back to Torah? Men and women alike. What does it mean I give back? What can I give to the Torah back? Which has been the magnus opus of the Jewish people. That's the biggest thing. What do you mean I give back? A person who's true to who they are as the individual, and they don't sacrifice, even if you grow spiritually, you don't sacrifice your personality and who you are. It means now when someone sees you, wow, I didn't realize you can be a Torah observant Jew and be the way you are. It's an unbelievable thing. That means you gave a flavor, you gave a perspective to Torah that someone else never actually ever imagined is possible by being who you are. It's an incredible thing. It's it's beautiful because it's almost as if, obviously we have rules and laws. We have rules of Shabbat, we have rules of not eating chametz on Pesach. We have a lot of rules and laws. But it's so rich, and the variety is so expansive. Hashem says, here, take your canvas, take your brush, take your paint. Here, just express yourself in this canvas. Don't go past the canvas. Beyond the canvas is not good for you. Express yourself within the context of what we have as Jews, because you give a flavor, you give a sense of, wow, I can connect to this person. Because I don't connect to black and white. People wear black and white, that's fine. You don't have to. That's perfectly okay. But there's somebody else that I can connect to. And there's so many speakers who are not rabbis per se, and they go out and they do tremendous work. And they have this almost like a character of Torah that people have not seen before. Whether it's business people, whether it's life coaches, etc. There's a guy named Charlie Harari. Maybe some of you have heard of him. Very successful guy, but he has he goes out and he speaks. And at the best of my knowledge, I don't know if he has his smicha where he's a rabbi. Maybe yes, maybe no. It doesn't come off that he does. I wouldn't be surprised if he does have. But that's just like one guy. There's other guys. There's Gedal Fenster, right? Gedali Fenster. Some of you maybe have heard of him. He's also one of those guys that he goes out and tries to inspire other Jews. Successful guy. You have that. You don't have to be a specific way. You don't have to sacrifice your individuality. You're not supposed to. It's a part of your makeup, what you experience. The greatest rabbi that we have, Moshe Rabbeinu, he's called Rabbeinu, he's a prophet, but the greatest rabbi that we have in all the history, that's it may be argued, but not by a lot, is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was a rabbi who came from converts. Some say he was the son of a convert or the grandson of a convert. And for 40 years, he was an ignoramus. He didn't know anything about Torah. In fact, he hated the rabbis. He couldn't stand them. The Gemara says he wanted to bite them the bite of a donkey, of a mule, because it's a bite that cracks the bones. And something happened. I'm not getting to the story. What happened? He saw a rock, and then he realized that even though he struggled with understanding and learning, he saw a rock, and he was walking by, and he saw there was a drop that's coming from the top, and he looked, and he saw that there was a hole in the rock, like a very nice, perfect hole, and he realized it's from the drop. Now he figured, how many drops do you need to get to make a hole in a rock? In the trillions. But he says, if water can do that to a stone, then what can Torah do for me? So he sat down at age 40, and he sat down with the 5-year-old, 6-year-olds. He started learning until he went up the ranks. Every single sefer, every single book you see today, in a Bet Midrash, in a Bet Knesset, has Rabbi Akiva's hands on it. Without him, these books would not be here. Why am I saying this? Rabbi Akiva came from a place of converts. That's where he comes from. He didn't deny it, or he was not shy of it. It was a part of who he is. And he took that and used it as a value system where he can relate to other people. That's exactly Rabbi Akiva, and that's why he became like the goat of all rabbis. He had that ability. You don't sacrifice your individuality. Don't think that just because me living a Torah observant life means I have to. No, there's many things you could do. There's a lot of fun. Okay, there's certain limitations. That's true, and maybe over time you're gonna sense that. Yeah, I did it and I enjoyed, but it doesn't really give me fulfillment. It doesn't give me real satisfaction. I don't feel uplifted by maybe certain things that I used to do. Fine, that may take time, or that's something we can talk about. At the end of the day, it's something that you cannot sacrifice who you are. Anochi means there was an aspect where we were in Egypt and we were slaves, and that's why God is saying it's a part of your identity. You can't remove that. You can't remove your past from who you are. You're not supposed to hide it or be ashamed of it. I'm not saying there's an aspect you don't regret. Fine, but what are you going to do about it? There's not much you can do. You can take it and use it for something else. You can use it as even possibly a source of pride or not, whatever. But it depends how you feel. But you can figure out a way to do it, which means that it needs to be a source of the whole reality of Pesach is. It's also the realization that how much Hashem is in our life. In the moments where things are really not ideal or difficult, you realize how much involvement He has in our life. You realize how much He's there. There's a guy. His name is Lavi Greenspan. I don't know. I'm not sure. I actually met him in person, and he goes out and he speaks. He's blind, but he wasn't always blind. He became an attorney while being blind, and he became an attorney while being blind, and in the process. And I think, and this guy is, the energy that comes out of this guy is out of this world. And he discussed that he had a situation where he had something that was growing and that really affected his ability to see. And over time, slowly, he kind of lost his vision. And the way he speaks about his experience, and the way he goes to crowds, and he's a very funny guy, he'll even makes fun of it. He'll go and he's like, if you guys want to get somewhere fast, let me be the driver. Like he makes all these jokes, and he really makes people feel comfortable. And one thing I can tell you is, every single time he discusses his difficulty, and it's hard for him. And he says sometimes he loses something and he doesn't know where it is. Like just imagine for a second a person who's blind and maybe have the tendency not to be so maybe organized, right? For a second you don't know where something is. Do you know how much effort it would require for a person to go and look for it when they can't see? And he was saying one time that he put all the effort, and then he just sat down back on the couch. And this is the story he said. It's on there's one of those podcasts. It's called Meaningful Minute. And he says, I'm sitting down on the couch, and I say, Hashem, I can't see. I need you to tell me where I think he was looking for his keys or something. I need the keys. And he says, I promise you, even though I can't see, he says, a finger comes into my mind and points exactly to where it is, and I put my hand and I have the key in my hand. It's an unbelievable thing. And he also recently got married in his 40s. It's something where he's taking his reality and he's converted it into a superpower almost. And by the way, he's not given up hope on regaining his vision. And he says it. Things have really progressed technologically, and I can regain my vision. I can do it. And I actually believe he will. Be'ezrat Hashem. I really do. Because he's a very, very unique and special human being, but he appreciates the divine providence and divine involvement in his life. He celebrates it. He acknowledges the difficulty, but he celebrates that reality, which comes out an unbelievable thing. How do you say Passover in Hebrew? Pesach. Pesach is comprised of two words. Pesach, the mouth speaks. That's the whole holiday. The whole holiday is that the mouth speaks, is that we talk. That's the name of it in itself. And what do we read on Pesach? The Haggadah. In Hebrew, there's no synonyms. Each word has, I explained this before, has its own meaning. They're related. Speaking, saying, all these words. There's a lot of words that are related to one another, but they don't mean in the definition of their words. They're not identical. So you use different words for different forms of expression. The word Haggadah is actually a tough or a form of expression, which means going over through the Haggadah is tough. In itself, that is not easy. But when we do it, it becomes our source of pride. Then that's something we are going to come to appreciate. But the word itself, Haggadah, means it comes from the word gid. Gid are snooze. These are the parts of the body that are difficult, and that's what it actually expresses itself. But it's a mirror image for the collective and for the individual of what people have actually gone through. Which means something else as well. The Gemara says, "Benisan nigalnu veBenisan atidin ligalel," which means the time of redemption is going to be in the month of Nisan. The way to get to redemption, there's the collective, but there's also the individual. Is if we allow the problem to be our master and not allow ourselves to become the master of the problem, it's very hard to redeem ourselves from it. Because whenever a person is sad or downtrodden, even Yaakov Avinu, which is considered the greatest of all the forefathers, greater than Yitzchak and greater than Abraham, Hashem's divine presence, Hashem removed himself for about almost 20 years. Why? Because Yaakov was sad. He was down about his son. Nobody's blaming Chas v'Shalom, but the Shekhinah, God's presence cannot be in a place where there's sadness, when people feel downtrodden. So for a person not to have these feelings, to overcome that, they need to speak about it. Which means that when we do talk about it, then it becomes very slowly a form of geulah, a form of redemption. If I talk about something, it becomes a form of redemption for me. I'm able to redeem myself from that difficulty or that challenge. And that's why the Gemara says, we were redeemed in the month of Nisan, and in the future, we're going to be redeemed also in the month of Nisan. It's a month where people can actually redeem themselves. It's a month where it's much more than miracles happening. It's a month where the realization that it's a source of pride for me, what I've been through. And it's a lot more meaningful. And so this is the whole concept of Pesach. And it's 7 or 8 days long, depending where you are. And it's a time where you really appreciate those challenges and difficulties. And sometimes you may be in one, but you can draw from other ones, or you can draw from the Jewish people, you can draw from what we've experienced and where we got to today. And that's the whole yesod, that's the whole concept of Pesach. The mouth speaks, and when you speak, you give it a dimension, you give it a shape, and you're not fearful anymore. Because knowledge of something overcomes fear. Not knowing something is very fearful. Knowing something, I'm a lot more confident. But that's what communicating and speaking does. Also, when you say things out loud verbally, and it also does something to you. If you're trying to work on a habit, right? And assuming you're a person who really tries to fulfill the words, if you say something out loud and yourself, I am not doing this and this today, and you say it out loud, or even in front of people, it's very empowering, because now it requires you to do that. And the way we separate ourselves from all other living things is by speech. That's the very thing that makes us godlike. There's values and character traits that we have, but in the essence of speech, we can create, we can uplift, we can destroy, God forbid, and do the worst. But that's the message I very much like to leave. That's what Pesach is all about. Are there any questions?
You said something about the Shabbat that lands on Pesach?
Yes, thank you. So this is exactly, how are we able to move on from the destruction of the temple? By speaking about it. We have Megillat Echa where we read, we discuss the Lamentations, we lament about it, we talk about it, there's stories of why we got there, how did this happen to us, right? We analyze the behavior. The whole Gemara, by the way, the whole concept of anyone who learned Gemara before is questions and answers and trying to understand things and trying to reconcile contradictions. That's the whole concept of learning is exactly that, right? So that's what, if I can kind of summarize all of it together as one, is and that's how we answer that the matzot itself although it's a bread of affliction, but we understand that affliction has become a source of pride for us. And before we give anything over to the kids, we have to discuss the failures, because they're going to draw from that a lot. That you give them you give them weapons for life and how to manage situation. And destruction of the Mikdash, until this day we mourn, right? We go into 3 week of mourning period, right? And even throughout the year in Asara B'Tevet, where they did a siege around the walls of Jerusalem, we fast, which is the month before Avadar. We before Tevet, we fast also. It's part, everything we do, if you think about it, all the mitzvot we do, Kiddush, Mitzrayim, we talk about Mitzrayim. But every single mitzvah that we do, when we pray, Mitzrayim. Everything is Mitzrayim, right? I got you out of Egypt. All that is part of the makeup. And obviously you guys know, when in the chuppah, it's a common misconception, when right toward the end of the chuppah, we put a glass down, right? And then the Hatan says, right? He comes and he says, no, not in the Kodesh. He says well, I'm going blank now. Yeah, thank you. And what does he do? He smashes the glass. What do people say? A second later, Mazal Tov. It's a mistake. You're not supposed to do that. Why? You have to wait literally 2 or 3 seconds. Breaking the glass is a reminder that there's no real full happiness without the Beit HaMikdash. You have to wait 2 or 3 seconds, at least we're happy that they're getting married, but there's no full happiness without the existence of Beit HaMikdash, because Hashem is homeless. We discussed this last week. And another commentary is that very much that these children are going to build a Beit Ne'eman b'Yerushalayim. They're going to go to Yerushalayim and they're going to build a house in Eretz Yisrael. That's another aspect that we try to celebrate. So it's a part of our makeup. The same day, meaning if Pesach falls on a Monday, so too Tisha B'Av is going to fall on a Monday. That's what it means. And so that we also go and we celebrate. And that's why we say Anochi it's an Egyptian word. It's a part of our makeup. We were in Egypt. There's those aspects that it defines us. But we use it as a source of pride, not as a source of, it's not this, it's in spite of what we went through that this is where we are here today. And that, by the way, it's a model not just for the collective, but for the individual. Each person, that's what Pesach is. Everyone has a collective, there's a collective redemption, and there's an individual redemption. Pesach and the time of Nisan is the time where these things not only can, but very much will happen.
I have a question that's a little off topic. Why do you say Bekata Ilano on Nisan? What's the reflection?
Well, that's the times that, it's first of Nisan is the first of the month of all the months, but the reason we say Bekata Ilano is because it's a time where the first part of where the fruit that comes and protrudes out of that, and we go and we give bracha that should go and be throughout the whole year, should be fruitful in all these trees. Yeah, it's the start of the year. Yeah. Are there any more questions? Yeah.
I understand that it makes sense to talk about hardships that you went through, but what about hardships that you're going through? I feel like certain times it would be better not to talk about it, because in most cases you know the answer, like in the hardships that you're dealing with right now, most of the time you know what's right, what's wrong, what you should do, how you should act. So does the concept we're talking about go through for hardships that we're dealing with in the moment as well?
Both. It has to be both, because just remember the story I gave with the person who got a very life-threatening disease.
Even if you know the answer, you should still talk about it.
So it's less about knowing what the answer is, it's about the process. It's always about the process, because what gets us to, what makes things manageable is going through the process. Talking about it, because I said in the very beginning, gives it dimensions, gives an idea. Answer is one thing. right? You get the answer, but the what's going to get you out of something is the process that you're going through. It's the understanding of it in itself. And so when a person, like the example I gave with the rabbi, where he said, he told the guy, he says, why don't you go learn about this disease? Study it thoroughly. He was in the middle of it. Because it's, and by the way, even though we say we know what the answer is, pondering it or contemplating it is not so much as, okay, that may be the answer, but is there another perspective? Is there something here that I'm missing? Because if you're not able to get through something, it's very likely not the answer. And that's what we say, Aseh lechalav v'tzeh min hasafed, right? Make yourself a rabbi, and and the doubt, that's what we say, da'aga belev adam, the fear, or the trouble, or the worry that you experience, right? Is da'aga belev adam yashhena. Yashhena means something that presses down for you. So the rabbis they flip the word, they flip the letter. They go from a shin to a sin. Yasihena mida'ato, from your mind, you're going to speak it out from your mind, or le'aharim, or to somebody else, right? So a lot of times, even in a married couple, a lot of times after a long day, there's a need for the wife to talk about the day, her difficulties and challenges, and men have the obligation to sit there and not the obligation, they have to give the feeling that I want to hear about your day. Do not give the feeling like, oh, you can't hear this anymore, like I'm exhausted. No, you have to, and you have to genuinely feel like I want to know how your day went. It's not always easy, because we have our days too, we have our difficulty. We have our situation, but they have a need, and we have to, if we want them to be interested in what we're interested in, we have to demonstrate that we're genuinely interested in what they're interested in. So we have to, I'm here to listen to what you have to say. And a lot of times, if you give them the ability to speak, right, you'll see all of a sudden like, everything's fine. But if you don't give them the ability, it can be very tense, and things can explode. And
we have to express ourselves. It doesn't have to be the world. It could be
right. You want to find one person that you confided in, that you know really wants in your best interest, but you also want to make sure that they have life experience, that they can guide you accordingly. That's why I say, like, slowly develop a relationship with a rabbi where you can really trust and you really can connect to. It's important.
So what does the Beit HaMikdash have to do with waiting 2 to 3 seconds?
I can hear you.
What does the Beit HaMikdash have to do with waiting 2 to 3 seconds?
Under the chuppah and breaking it?
Yeah.
Because the idea here is, people right away say Mazal Tov, but we're not celebrating the hitting the cup and breaking it, is we're taking a moment to mourn, to experience the fact that we don't have the Beit HaMikdash. Because there's no full, real happiness, right, without the Beit HaMikdash existing. In fact, there's halakha. Very interesting.
Like the silence
The silence right there is the commemoration of we don't have it there, right? In fact, there's halakha when you build a house, you want the house to look amazing, but there has to be an area in the house that is, maybe you didn't paint, or you didn't do something as a reminder. There's actually halachot in this, as a reminder that Beit HaMikdash is not built inside your house, because God is homeless. Literally you have that halakha. There's no real full sense of happiness without the Beit HaMikdash here. Are there any questions in the back? Don't be shy. Good? Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.